She had been called a temp, a placeholder, a nobody who wouldn't last the month. They were wrong about all of it. The morning the military walked into Silver Creek Medical Center, the ER had 43 patients and exactly 0 attending physicians on the floor. A chest trauma in Bay 4, a diabetic crash in Bay 7, a pediatric seizure they were still trying to stabilize. And Olivia Carter, travel nurse, 6 weeks in, the woman the charge nurse called that girl from wherever, behind her back, was the only one running between all three. Then the doors opened. 4 people in military dress, badges she recognized from a life she never talked about. And they didn't ask for the administrator. They didn't ask for the medical director. They walked straight to her. Every head in the ER turned. Olivia didn't flinch. She looked at the lead officer, read his rank in half a second, and said, "Give me 4 minutes." Then she went back to the seizure. "If you've made it this far, I want you to stay until the very end, because this story is going to go places you won't see coming. Like this video, follow along, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels." Redwood Falls was the kind of mid-sized city that liked to believe it mattered more than it did. Decent highway access, 2 colleges, a minor league baseball team that finished last 3 seasons running, and Silverbrook Medical Center, renamed Silver Creek after a rebranding campaign that cost more than the hospital's radiology upgrade. The administration liked the new name. It sounded clean, progressive, like a place where things were done right. Olivia Carter arrived on a Tuesday in late March, contracted through a staffing agency out of Nashville, assigned to emergency and trauma nursing for a 13-week rotation. She drove a 7-year-old Subaru with a cracked passenger mirror and a travel mug that said "World's Okayest Camper." She found her assigned apartment, dropped 2 bags by the door, ate a granola bar over the sink, and showed up to orientation at 6 the next morning. The first person she met was the charge nurse, Denise Pollard. 51, 22 years at Silver Creek, hair pulled so tight it looked like a structural decision. Denise took one look at Olivia's paperwork and said, "Travel nurses never know our protocols. Just shadow and try not to break anything for the first week." Olivia said, "Understood." That was the tone from the start. It wasn't overt. Nobody called her incompetent to her face, not right away. It was smaller than that. The way Denise handed off the worst assignments without explanation. The way the attending physician on nights, Dr. Harmon Briggs, spoke directly to the other nurses around her, as if she were a piece of furniture with a pulse. The way staff meetings ended before she arrived because nobody had put her on the distribution list. She asked twice to be added. It happened 3 weeks later. She didn't make a scene about any of it. She'd worked with harder people in harder places. She clocked in, did her job, clocked out. She kept her mouth shut about most things. Not all things. The supply problem started in her 2nd week. She noticed it the way she noticed most things, incidentally, and then with growing precision. A patient in Bay 2 needed a specific anticoagulant. The medication was listed as available in the system. The medication was not on the shelf. She pulled a workaround from the attending, documented the gap, and moved on. But the same thing happened 3 days later with cardiac monitoring leads. Then with a type of IV line used for central access. Then with a controlled substance count that came up 2 units short on a Wednesday and was quietly corrected on Thursday without any incident report filed. She filed one herself. Denise pulled her aside that afternoon. Her voice was patient in the way that certain people are patient when they are also furious. The incident reports create liability exposure. The system logged a data error. It's handled. "It wasn't a data error," Olivia said. "The count was off." The pharmacist reviewed it. "Did anyone review the pharmacist?" There was a pause. Denise looked at her the way someone looks at a child who has just said something technically accurate but socially disqualifying. "You're here for 13 weeks, she said. "I'd focus on finishing them." Olivia went home that night and opened the Notes app on her phone. She typed the date, the medication name, the bay number, the names of everyone who had been present. She'd been keeping the list for 9 days. It had 14 entries. She kept adding. The hospital administrator was a man named Garrett Finch. He'd come up through hospital finance, not medicine, which Olivia thought explained several things. He wore excellent suits and had the handshake of a man who considered handshakes a performance. He gave a quarterly address to staff that he called the alignment meeting, which was 25 minutes of slides about patient satisfaction scores and operational efficiency, followed by 5 minutes of questions that nobody asked because asking them had historically not gone well. Olivia attended her first one in week 3. She sat near the back. She didn't ask anything. Afterward, she lingered by the water station and listened to 2 nurses talk in the low, tired shorthand of people who had stopped expecting things to change. "The laundry service contract changed again," one of them said. Her name badge said Priya. She was maybe 35, and she had the posture of someone who had been disappointed many times and was conserving energy for the next one. "Third vendor in 2 years. Because Finch keeps going with whoever gives him the best kickback," the other one said. This one was younger, a tech named Marcus, and he said it the way young people sometimes say things, like it was obvious, like surely everyone already knew, like he couldn't quite believe the world didn't fix it automatically. "Careful," Priya said. Marcus looked over his shoulder. "It's not like it's a secret." "It's not a secret and it's also not investigated," Priya said, "which means it's not our problem." Olivia filled her cup and walked away. She thought about what Priya had said for the rest of that shift. By week 4, she had a system. She wasn't dramatic about it. She didn't sneak around or act like she was in a movie. She just paid attention, which she had always been good at, and wrote things down, which she had been doing in some form or another since she was 22 years old, and learning that in chaotic environments, the only thing you could count on was documentation. The supply discrepancies were the clearest thread. She tracked them across 3 weeks and identified a pattern. Shortages clustered around the same rotating shift, logged by the same 2 inventory staff, corrected before audits. The corrections were just plausible enough to pass a casual review. Someone had put thought into the gap between obviously wrong and technically explainable. The contracts were harder to trace. She couldn't access the financial systems, but she could read purchase orders when they were accidentally left in the staff lounge printer, which happened twice. She could note vendor names and look them up on her phone in 30 seconds. The third-party linen vendor had a registered agent with the same last name as Silver Creek's operations director. She wrote that down too. She wasn't building a case. She kept telling herself that. She was a travel nurse doing a 13-week contract, not an investigator, not an attorney, not anyone with authority over any of this. She was just someone who had grown up in a particular way and couldn't stop noticing things that didn't add up. The thing about noticing, though, is that eventually the things you've noticed start to add up into something you can't ignore. The direct confrontation happened in week 5. She flagged a patient. Bay 11, male, 63, chest pain with an atypical presentation that didn't match the triage assessment. She pulled the chart, looked at the EKG that had been run 40 minutes earlier, and walked to the nursing station to find Briggs. He was talking to a pharmaceutical rep. She could tell by the tote bag and the way Briggs was smiling. "Dr. Briggs," she said, "Bay 11 needs a second look. The EKG shows some changes I think are worth—" "I've reviewed it," he said without looking at her. "With respect, the changes in leads—" "Nurse." He said the word the way some people use ma'am, technically respectful, actually dismissive. "I've reviewed the EKG. The patient is being monitored. When I need your interpretation of cardiology, I'll ask for it." The pharmaceutical rep looked slightly uncomfortable. Olivia looked at Briggs for 1 second longer than was comfortable, then went back to Bay 11. She pulled up a stool, sat with the patient, and spent 7 minutes asking him questions. His name was Raymond. He was visiting his daughter. He'd had a mild MI 5 years ago and recognized the feeling in his chest as similar, but not the same. He said his jaw had been aching since morning. He said he was also nauseated, but he didn't want to complain because he thought maybe it was just anxiety. She documented all of it. She paged the cardiologist on call directly, which technically required attending sign-off, which she did not have. She did it anyway. The cardiologist, a woman named Dr. Nadia Voss, arrived 20 minutes later. Raymond was in a catheterization lab 14 minutes after that. He had a 90% occlusion in the LAD, the kind that kills people in parking lots on the way home. Briggs found her afterward. He was not smiling. "You bypassed me." "I documented my concern twice," she said. "The patient was deteriorating. You went over my head on a cardiac workup I had already assessed. The patient had a STEMI." There was a beat. "That's not your call to make." "Someone had to make it," she said. He stared at her. "I'll be speaking to Denise about this." "Okay," she said. He did speak to Denise. Denise pulled Olivia aside the next morning and told her that while the outcome had been favorable, the process had created a significant problem with the medical staff. She used the word friction. She said travel nurses who created friction had difficulty getting extended contracts. Olivia said she understood. She went home and added the incident to her notes. Date, time, attending name, patient outcome, conversation transcript from memory, reconstructed as precisely as she could. She was up to 31 entries. The week after the Briggs incident, her schedule changed. She'd been working a standard rotation, 3/12s, one swing, reasonable distribution across the week. The new schedule had her on 4 overnight shifts, all in the lowest acuity section of the ER, a stretch of weekend time that guaranteed she'd see almost no critical cases. It also put her consistently paired with a senior nurse named Tamara, who made it clear in the first 10 minutes of their first shared shift that she thought Olivia was trouble. "Whatever you did with Briggs," Tamara said, not looking up from charting, "don't do it again on my shift." "He missed a STEMI," Olivia said. "He's been here 19 years, Tamara said. "You've been here 5 weeks. "The artery doesn't care how long anyone's been here." Tamara set down her pen and looked at her. She wasn't cruel about it. She was just very tired in the way that people become tired when they have decided the institution is permanent and they are not. "You're going to burn yourself out fighting a building," she said. "The building always wins." Olivia thought about that for the rest of the shift. She didn't stop filing notes. The false complaint arrived in week 6. Denise called her in, printed copy on the desk. A patient had submitted a formal complaint through the hospital's grievance system, alleging that Olivia had been dismissive, rough during a blood draw, and had made a comment about the patient's weight that was humiliating. Olivia sat with it for a moment. She remembered the patient. Male, late 40s, referred from primary care for cardiac screening. She'd taken 2 draws because the first vein collapsed. She'd apologized for it and explained the anatomy. She hadn't said anything about his weight because she didn't do that. "I want to see the original complaint form," she said. "That's not standard for the review process. I'd like to see who filed it and when. That information is confidential during investigation." "There's an investigation?" "There's a review," Denise said. "Standard procedure for any grievance." Olivia looked at the printed copy. The language was oddly formal. The word dismissive appeared twice with the same phrasing, which was unusual for an organic patient complaint. She'd seen enough paperwork in her life to know the difference between something a frustrated patient wrote and something that had been helped along. "I'm cooperating with the review," she said. "I'd like that documented." Denise made a note. Olivia walked out to the parking lot on her lunch break, sat in her Subaru, and stared at the cracked passenger mirror. She was not panicking. She was cataloging. The false complaint was a new escalation. The schedule change had been passive. This was active. Someone had decided she was a problem that needed to be managed out rather than just inconvenienced. She thought about her options. She could call the staffing agency and request an early reassignment. She could find a reason to leave clean, or she could stay. She thought about Raymond in the cath lab. She thought about the medication counts. She thought about Priya's tired voice saying, "It's not our problem." She ate the rest of her lunch and went back inside. The shift where everything changed started like any other one. A Thursday afternoon in April. She came on at 3. The ER was running at about 70% capacity, busy but manageable. There was a 5-car accident pulling resources toward Trauma Bay 1, 2 pediatric cases in the back, and a general chaos of walk-ins that kept the triage desk moving steadily. At 4:17, a man came through the main entrance without checking in. He was white, early 50s, good suit, lanyard with an unfamiliar badge around his neck. He was walking too fast and his color was wrong, gray-tinged with a damp look around the temples. He made it about 12 feet past the automatic doors before his legs stopped working. He didn't fall dramatically. He went down in stages. His shoulder hit a support column. He used it to slow himself, and then he was on the floor in a seated slump, still technically conscious, his right hand pressed to the center of his chest. Olivia was crossing the waiting room with a wheelchair for a different patient. She saw it happen in real time. She set the wheelchair against the wall, moved to him, and was on her knees before the front desk had finished processing the fact that someone had fallen. "Sir, look at me." She put a hand to his jaw, not rough, but firm, and tilted his face toward her. His pupils were reactive. His breathing was labored, but present. His pulse was 44 and irregular, which she could feel at his wrist in 3 seconds. "Are you on any heart medications?" "No," he said. It came out like the word had to be assembled from parts. "Any chest pain before today?" "Some." He was fading, not dramatically. The particular quiet fade of someone whose body was running out of contingency plans. "What's your name?" "Harwick." He blinked. "Conrad Harwick." "Okay, Conrad, stay with me." She looked up. "I need a crash cart. I need someone paging Voss. And I need an AED over here now. Not in 30 seconds. Now." 2 nurses she didn't know well came at a run. Marcus appeared from somewhere with the AED. She was already repositioning Harwick flat, checking his airway, feeling for the rhythm that was now absent from his wrist. He went into VFib at 4:21. She started CPR. She was precise about it in a way that comes from doing something under real conditions enough times that the body takes over. Not muscle memory exactly, more like muscle certainty. Hands stacked, elbows locked, 2 inches, full recoil, rate around 110, slightly faster than training because that was the rate she'd found actually worked. She counted in her head, not out loud, because counting out loud was for people who needed the sound to stay focused. A ED charged. She delivered the shock. She resumed compressions before anyone had to tell her to. Dr. Briggs arrived at 4:24. He looked at the situation, Olivia on the floor, Marcus managing the airway, a small circle of staff doing exactly what they should, and for a moment he didn't do anything. Then he said, "I'll take over." "His rhythm just came back," Olivia said, not stopping. "Give me 20 seconds." Briggs stood there. She finished the cycle, checked the monitor, saw a sinus rhythm that was ugly but real, and sat back on her heels. "He's back," she said. "Rate's 38. He needs a transvenous pacer." She stood up and looked at Briggs. He was already moving. This time he didn't argue. Harwick went to cardiac care alive. She watched them take him through the double doors and felt the particular deflation that follows sustained adrenaline. Not satisfaction, not relief, just the return of the world to its regular weight. She went to the utility sink, washed her hands twice, and went back to work. At 6:45 that evening, 4 people she had never seen before walked through the ER entrance. They were in different uniforms, 2 in civilian clothes that didn't look civilian, 2 in army dress. The badges were federal. She caught a glimpse of one from across the room and identified the issuing agency before they had made it 10 feet inside. Garrett Finch appeared from the direction of the administrative wing. He moved fast, hand extended, administrator smile engaged. "Gentlemen, welcome. If you'll come to my office, we can—" "We're fine out here," the lead officer said. He was maybe 45, compact, with the kind of stillness that isn't passivity. His name badge said Kellerman. He looked across the ER, past Finch, scanning methodically. Then he stopped. Olivia was at the nursing station charting Harwick's resuscitation notes. She felt the attention the way you sometimes feel someone looking at you in a dark room, not threatening, just suddenly present. Kellerman said something to the officer beside him. Then he walked directly across the ER floor toward her. Finch followed, looking confused in a way that was beginning to shade into something else. Denise appeared from the back corridor and froze near the supply room door. Kellerman stopped at the nursing station. He looked at her badge. He said, "Olivia Carter?" She set down her pen. "That's me." He opened a credential wallet and showed her identification she didn't need to study carefully to understand. "We need to speak with you," he said. "There are some things that have come to our attention." She held his gaze. Behind him, Finch was close enough that she could see the moment his expression changed. Not just confusion now. Something underneath it. Something that looked a lot like the specific fear of a man who has made careful plans and is watching them become uncertain. "Regarding what, exactly?" she said. Kellerman looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Regarding this hospital." The ER noise continued around them. Monitors, voices, the PA system calling a code in another wing. But in the small radius of the nursing station, everything had gone very still. Olivia picked up her pen, clicked it closed, and set it on top of the chart. She'd been waiting 5.5 weeks for something to break open. She had not expected it to be this. Kellerman didn't move her to a conference room right away. He asked if there was somewhere private, and when Finch immediately offered his office, Kellerman said, "Somewhere that isn't administration." He said it without looking at Finch. It landed like a door closing. They ended up in the family consultation room off the east corridor, a small, carpeted space with chairs that were trying too hard to be comfortable and a box of tissues on every surface. 2 of Kellerman's people took positions in the hallway. The fourth, a woman who had not introduced herself but whose bearing said she hadn't always worked a desk, sat in the corner with a tablet and didn't look up. Kellerman sat across from Olivia. He put a file folder on the table between them but didn't open it. "You've been at Silver Creek 6 weeks, he said. 5.5. In that time, you've filed 4 internal incident reports. 3, she said. The 4th was rejected before it processed." He looked at her. "Just a flicker of something, recalibration maybe." "You kept a record of the rejected one." It wasn't a question. She answered it anyway. "I keep records of everything." He nodded slowly. "What format?" "Notes app, time-stamped, backed up to a second location." "When did you start?" "Day 9. He leaned back in the chair just slightly. "Why day 9 specifically?" She thought about how to answer that. Not because she was being careful, she was past careful, but because the honest answer required a second to assemble. "Day 1 through 8, I told myself it was probably normal. Hospitals are disorganized, staffing is stretched, supplies run out. Day 9, the controlled substance count came up short and got corrected by someone who wasn't authorized to touch that log. That's not disorganization, that's architecture." The woman in the corner typed something. Kellerman said, "We're going to need your documentation." "I know," she said. "Before I give it to you, I want to understand what you already have." There was a pause. He looked at her in the way people sometimes look when they've prepared for one version of a conversation and are adjusting to another. "That's not typically how this works." "I've been in rooms like this before," Olivia said. "Not this exact room, but this kind of room. I know how it works. I'm asking anyway." Something in his posture shifted, not dramatically. He picked up the file folder and opened it to a page she couldn't read from across the table. "Conrad Harwick," he said. "The man you resuscitated this afternoon." "What about him?" "He's a defense contractor. His firm holds 3 active federal contracts related to medical supply procurement. 2 of those contracts have routing that intersects with Silver Creek's secondary supply chain." He paused. "He was here for a site visit, unannounced." Olivia sat with that for a moment. "He wasn't here for care." "No." "Was the collapse genuine?" "Cardiologist says yes. VFib secondary to an arrhythmia he apparently didn't know he had." Kellerman almost smiled, but it didn't fully form. "So the timing was coincidental. The circumstances were not." She looked at the table, the supply chain, the secondary vendor, the controlled substance counts. She'd been pulling on threads without knowing what was underneath the fabric. "How long have you been watching this hospital?" she asked. "That's not something I'm going to answer right now." "Fair enough." She looked up. "What do you need from me tonight?" They kept her in the consultation room for 2 hours and 20 minutes. During that time, Garrett Finch requested access to the room 3 separate times. He was turned away all 3. She could hear his voice in the corridor once, pitched higher than usual, and the quieter, flat response from the officer outside the door. She transferred her documentation, all 61 entries, to a secure portal the woman in the corner set up on a federal device. She narrated the context for each one, filling in things that the timestamps and medical terminology didn't capture on their own. The pharmacist who corrected the count was named Rourke. He worked the Thursday swing and had been at Silver Creek for 11 years. The vendor name she'd found on the printer had been Dalton Y. Medical Solutions. She'd looked it up on her phone 3 weeks ago and found that it had been incorporated 18 months prior to Silver Creek's last contract renewal. She told them about Briggs and the STEMI. She told them about the complaint form and the language that had felt pre-written. She told them about Priya's comment in the hallway and about Tamara and about the schedule change. Kellerman listened without interrupting. He asked precise questions. Nothing was wasted. At 9:05, he closed the folder and said, "We'll be back tomorrow morning. Don't discuss this with anyone on staff." "What about my shift?" "You're on tonight?" "I'm scheduled. If I leave early, it'll be noticed." He considered that. "Finish your shift. Don't deviate from your normal routine. If anyone asks about our conversation, you can say it was related to the Harwick resuscitation." "That's technically true," she said. "Yes," he said. "It is." She went back to the floor. The rest of the shift was strange in the particular way of things that are outwardly ordinary and inwardly transformed. The ER continued at its normal pace. A broken wrist, an allergic reaction, 2 elderly patients with fall-related injuries. She did her work. She charted. She spoke to colleagues in the necessary ways. Denise caught her by the medication room at 10:30. Her voice was careful and even, which meant she was working at it. "The investigators," she said. "What did they want?" "The Harwick resuscitation," Olivia said. "He has a federal clearance, standard protocol when someone with that clearance has a medical event." Denise watched her face. Denise was not stupid, which Olivia had always known. She was compromised in some way she might not even fully understand herself, shaped by the institution over 22 years into someone who protected its stability the way you protect a tooth that you know needs pulling. "They were here a long time for a standard protocol." "His case was complicated," Olivia said. "They had a lot of questions." Another beat. Then Denise said, "Stay out of whatever this is." It was the most honest thing she'd said to Olivia in 6 weeks. It might have even been intended as protection. Olivia looked at her and said, "Okay." She went back to the floor and didn't look at Denise again for the rest of the shift. She drove home at 3:15 in the morning. The city was the specific quiet of places that aren't truly quiet, but have lowered their voice. Highway noise in the distance, a gas station lit up 3 blocks over, the occasional truck doing the infrastructure work that cities pretend doesn't happen. She sat in her car in the apartment parking lot for a few minutes before going inside. She wasn't afraid. That surprised her slightly, or would have surprised a younger version of herself. She'd spent the last several years in situations that should have left more of a residue. Some had. But the fear she'd expected to feel tonight, the exposure, the visibility, the sense of having crossed into something irreversible, wasn't there. What was there instead was something adjacent to clarity. She'd been building toward this without fully knowing it. The 61 entries hadn't been a hobby. They'd been evidence, and she had known, on some level she didn't let herself examine too directly, that she was collecting them for exactly this kind of room. She went inside. She didn't sleep much. She got up at 7 and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open to nothing in particular. At 8:40, her phone buzzed. It was a text from the staffing agency number. "Please call your coordinator at your earliest convenience. HR matter." She looked at the message for a moment. Then she called. Her coordinator was a woman named Janet, who had always been professionally pleasant in the way of people whose job requires it. This morning she sounded like she'd been given a script and was sticking to it with effort. "Olivia, we've received a formal complaint from Silver Creek's administration through the standard grievance channel. This is the 2nd complaint on record. The first one was fabricated," Olivia said. A pause. "I'm not able to evaluate the substance of the complaints. I can only... What are they claiming this time?" "Conduct unbecoming, specifically insubordination during an emergency response last evening and unauthorized direct contact with a patient's secondary medical team without attending approval." The Harwick resuscitation. They were using it. She'd done everything right and they were using it anyway, which was a particular kind of efficient cruelty that she could almost admire for its speed. 12 hours. Finch had filed within 12 hours. "What does the complaint process require from me?" she said. "You'd need to respond in writing within 48 hours. And I do have to tell you, Olivia, if a second complaint is substantiated, the agency policy is early contract termination." "Understood," she said. "I'll respond in writing." She hung up. She stared at the kitchen table. There was a coffee ring on the wood from some previous tenant, and she'd been meaning to buy a coaster for 6 weeks and hadn't gotten around to it. She took a breath, opened her laptop, and started writing her response. She She was thorough and she was specific, and she cited her documentation at every relevant point. It took 40 minutes. She read it back twice and sent it to the agency. Then she drove to the hospital. Kellerman was already there when she arrived at 10:20. He was in the parking lot, not inside, standing by a gray vehicle with two of his people and a third individual she hadn't seen the night before. A woman in a dark jacket who was carrying a document case that was too thick to be paperwork for one meeting. Olivia parked and walked over. Kellerman nodded at her. "They filed a complaint with my staffing agency last night," she said. "Harwick resuscitation, insubordination. It's the setup for early termination." Kellerman's expression didn't change exactly, but something in it tightened. "How long ago?" "I got the call at 8:40. He looked at the woman with the document case. She said, "That accelerates the timeline." "Yes," he said. He looked back at Olivia. "We're going in this morning. I need you to understand what that means. Once we enter that building and start this process, there's no controlled withdrawal. Whatever happens in there, happens." "I understand," Olivia said. "Your documentation is a significant part of our evidentiary base right now. The rest of our case has," he paused, "gaps that your records help fill." "How significant?" He was quiet for a moment. "Without your internal documentation, we have financial irregularities that a good attorney could argue into ambiguity. With it, we have a pattern." She understood what he wasn't saying. The federal case had been watching from the outside. She'd been watching from inside. The two things together made something neither one was alone. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "Work your scheduled shift. Stay visible. If administration attempts to remove you from the building before we've completed our initial interviews, text this number." He handed her a card. "Don't argue with them and don't leave voluntarily." She took the card. "And if Finch tries to move me somewhere private?" "Don't go anywhere private with anyone from administration. If they push, you are experiencing a medical issue and you need to remain in a staff area." A beat. "Be creative." "I can do that," she said. Asel. She went to her locker, changed into scrubs, and started her shift at 11. The ER was already busy. 4 overnight holds waiting for beds upstairs, a school bus incident that had brought in 6 pediatric patients with minor injuries, and the usual background noise of a Thursday morning in a regional hospital. She moved through the work with the deliberate focus of someone who understood that normal was currently her best protection. She started IVs, managed charts, assisted a first-year resident who was good but too in his own head about being good. His name was Dr. Elias Morrow, and he had the specific anxiety of someone who had aced every test in his life and was newly in a world where tests didn't prepare you for anything. "Breathe," she said to him, at the bed of a septic patient who needed a second line. "You've done this." "Not on someone this unstable," he said. "Same procedure. Slower hands, not faster." He got the line. She could see him filing it away, the instruction, the fact that it worked. He'd be okay. He needed a year in a different environment, but he'd be okay. At 12:40, she saw Finch through the glass of the administrative corridor. He was moving with purpose and accompanied by 2 people she didn't recognize. Hospital legal, she guessed. They had the particular look of attorneys who are being paid to move quickly. At 12:55, Denise appeared at the nursing station and asked Olivia to come to the charge desk for a schedule review. Olivia stayed where she was. "I'm in the middle of charting a patient transition. Can it wait 20 minutes?" "No," Denise said. "Administration needs to speak with you." "I'm not available right now," Olivia said. She kept her voice even, not confrontational, just a fact she was stating. "I'll be available in 20 minutes. Denise's jaw moved. "Olivia, I'm responsible for this patient right now," she said. "I'm sure administration understands liability." Denise looked at her for a long moment, then walked away. Olivia sent the text to Kellerman's number. "Administration attempting to move me off floor." 12:56. His response came back in under 2 minutes. Hold 90 seconds. It was closer to 4 minutes. Then she heard them. The front entrance. Not dramatic, no announcement, no uniforms that stood out immediately. But she could see through the ER's sightlines the way Kellerman and his team moved, which was the way she recognized from a long time ago. Not aggressive, just purposeful, in a way that doesn't negotiate with obstacles. There were more of them this time. She counted 6, and the woman with the document case was back, and behind them were two individuals in different jackets that said Federal Agent across the back in yellow letters that were impossible to misread. The ER stopped. Not completely. The monitors kept beeping, the phones kept ringing, but the human noise dipped the way it does when a room collectively understands that something is happening that is outside the usual category of things. Finch materialized from the administrative corridor. He was holding himself carefully, which was its own tell. Agent Kellerman, if we could just... Mr. Finch, Kellerman said it without stopping. Please don't go anywhere. He crossed to Olivia at the nursing station. He looked at her. You all right? Fine, she said. We're going to need conference room B, full floor access. He said the last part to the charge desk in general, not to any person specifically. Nobody from the administrative or financial departments is to leave this building. If someone needs to know why, you can tell them we'll explain shortly. Tamara was at the desk. She looked like she was standing very still by choice. Marcus, the tech, was somewhere nearby, and when Olivia glanced at him, he was watching with an expression that was not quite shock, but not shock either. And Priya was in the medication room doorway. She was looking at Olivia with an expression that Olivia couldn't fully categorize, something between recognition and a very long exhale. The next 4 hours were controlled chaos, which Olivia understood to be the best kind. She was interviewed again, this time formally, with a federal recorder on the table and a statement form she signed after reading it carefully. The woman with the document case, her name, Olivia learned, was Special Agent Dorinda Yates, led the second interview with a precision that was almost architectural. She went through Olivia's documentation entry by entry, asking clarifying questions that were not clarifications, but were in fact confirmations of specific evidentiary elements. Olivia answered all of them. In the break she wasn't supposed to take, she stood in the hallway with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and looked out a window at the hospital parking lot below. There were 2 federal vehicles she hadn't seen before. There were also 3 Redwood Falls PD units, which was new. Morrow found her in the hallway. He looked young in a way he probably didn't in most contexts. What's happening? He said. Federal investigation, she said. Into the hospital? Into the hospital. He processed that. The supply shortages, he said, with the particular tone of someone arriving at a conclusion they'd been circling for a while. She looked at him. You noticed those too? I'm a first-year resident. I noticed everything was harder than it should be and assumed I was the problem. He paused. I documented some of it. My personal notes, not official reports. I didn't think official reports would... They need your notes, she said. I have them on my phone. Tell Agent Yates. He nodded slowly. Then he said, You were building a case. I was keeping records, she said. He looked at her for a moment. That's the same thing, isn't it? She finished the cold coffee. Yeah, she said. It is. At 3:15, Garrett Finch was escorted to a conference room by 2 federal agents and did not come back out. His attorney, the man she'd clocked as legal at 12:40, arrived at 3:28 and was not allowed access to the conference room, which meant Finch was no longer in a voluntary interview. She registered that without letting her face show anything. Dr. Briggs was interviewed at 3:45. He came out looking substantially older than he'd looked going in. The pharmacist Rourke had not been on shift. She saw 2 agents leave the building quickly at 4 o'clock, and she thought probably Rourke's Thursday wasn't going the way he'd planned it. The staff on the floor had stopped pretending to work normally. People clustered in pairs and threes, speaking in the low, urgent shorthand of people trying to understand what their futures looked like. Olivia kept working. There were still patients. The ER did not take a break for federal investigations, and the pediatric cases from the school bus incident needed discharges, and the septic patient Morrow had struggled with needed a status update, and she did all of it. At 4:30, Denise found her again. Her face had changed since morning. The careful neutral she'd maintained for weeks was gone, replaced by something that was working very hard to be nothing. I didn't know, Denise said. Olivia kept charting. About the supply contracts. I didn't know how deep it went. Olivia stopped charting. She looked at her. You knew about the count corrections. Denise's mouth pressed together. I was told it was a system issue. You knew it wasn't. The silence stretched. I needed this job, Denise said. Olivia didn't feel contempt exactly. It was more like the particular tiredness of a truth that explains something without excusing it. Agent Yates is going to want to speak to you, she said. Don't wait for them to come find you. Go to conference room B and ask to speak with her. Denise looked at her. She was going to say something else. Olivia could see it, but she didn't. She turned and walked down the corridor. Olivia went back to her chart. Bob. At 6:10, Yates appeared at the nursing station. She set a document on the counter. It was a copy of a federal subpoena for Silver Creek Medical Center's records, procurement, personnel, financial, going back 4 years. She didn't make a production of it. She just put it there. There's something you should know, Yates said. Her voice was lower than it had been in the interview room, less formal. The supply chain we've been tracking, it's not just Silver Creek. Olivia looked at her. Dalton Y Medical Solutions. Yates said the name like she was setting it on the table for examination. The vendor you identified from the printer document. It's incorporated in this state, but it's a subsidiary holding. The parent company has contracts with 7 other regional hospital systems. Olivia absorbed that. How many hospitals? 7 confirmed, possibly 12. She did the math without meaning to. Patients, counts, corrections that weren't corrections, risks that had been papered over and logged as system errors across 7 hospitals, maybe 12. For how long? The fraud, she said. It's not just supply diversion. No, Yates said. There are patient billing irregularities. There are records of procedures billed but not performed. There are... She stopped. This is going to be a long investigation. Olivia put her hand flat on the counter because she needed something solid under it for a moment. How many patients? Yates's expression didn't soften, but it changed. We're still calculating. The ER noise continued around them. Somewhere down the corridor, a monitor alarm went off and was answered. The ordinary emergency of a hospital going about its work. What happens to Silver Creek? Olivia said. Federal receivership pending the criminal process. New interim administration by the end of the week. Yates picked up a different folder, then set it back down. You're going to be asked to testify. I want you to understand what that looks like. It's not quick, it's not clean, and it will involve people who are well-resourced finding ways to make your credibility the subject of discussion. I know what testimony looks like, Olivia said. Yates looked at her for a moment. Yes, she said. I imagine you do, sir. At 7 o'clock, the agency coordinator, Janet, called again. This time she sounded different, less scripted, more careful. Olivia, I've been contacted by a federal agency today regarding your contract at Silver Creek. They've asked us to maintain your placement and flag any further complaints from administration as potentially retaliatory. I wanted you to know that the complaint from this morning is on hold pending review. Thank you, Janet, Olivia said. Is there anything you need from us? She thought about that. Not right now, she said. She hung up and stood in the parking lot where she'd stood that morning with Kellerman. The evening had dropped a degree or two. The hospital behind her was lit up and still functioning. Inside, federal agents were cataloging 4 years of systematized theft and patient endangerment. Finch was in a room with attorneys. Briggs was somewhere looking at his career in the past tense. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. Ms. Carter. The voice was male, not young, with the particular flatness of someone disciplining their own urgency. My name is Reyes. I'm with the Department of Defense, Office of Inspector General. I've been briefed on tonight's events at Silver Creek, and there's something you need to be made aware of. He paused. Conrad Harwick, the man you resuscitated today. What about him? He came out of sedation an hour ago. He's asked to speak with the lead investigator and with you specifically. Another pause, shorter. He says he has documentation of his own, from inside Dalton Y. The parking lot was quiet around her. Somewhere a car turned over, headlights sweeping briefly across the asphalt. He's a whistleblower, she said. He was trying to be, Reyes said. Before the arrhythmia, he was meeting someone at Silver Creek, not hospital staff. Someone from inside the company who had agreed to hand him internal procurement records. A dead drop. If he hadn't collapsed in that lobby, he would have had the meeting and walked out, she said, and nobody would have been positioned to intervene. She understood what that meant. If Harwick had made the exchange and left, whatever he'd collected would have gone through whatever channel he'd been feeding it to. Quiet, slow, the kind of evidence that takes years to assemble into something actionable. Instead, he'd gone into VFib in a public ER. Instead, she'd been the one on the floor. Instead, Kellerman's team, already watching, already positioned, had walked through those doors. The sequence had not been planned. She hadn't planned it. Harwick hadn't planned it. The arrhythmia hadn't cooperated with anyone's schedule, but the result was that everything had compressed into a single afternoon, and whatever Harwick had been trying to do slowly was now happening fast, and whoever was on the other side of this supply chain had not had enough time to prepare. "He wants to meet tonight," she said. "Tomorrow morning is more realistic. He's stable, but he needs rest." Reyes's voice was careful now. "Ms. Carter, the person Harwick was supposed to meet, the contact from inside Dalton Y, hasn't been located yet." She waited. "They may not know the exchange didn't happen," he said, "which means they may still believe the information they were trying to hand over is secured. Or," he stopped. "Or they know Harwick collapsed," she said, "and they're trying to figure out what he told us before he went under." "Yes," Reyes said. She looked at the hospital entrance, the automatic doors, the light spilling out onto the dark parking lot. Somewhere in there, in a cardiac care room, a man with internal documents and a near-fatal arrhythmia was waiting for morning. And somewhere outside that building, the person who'd been supposed to receive them was in the dark about how much had changed in the last 8 hours. "Does Kellerman know about the contact?" she said. "He's being briefed now." "Good." She looked at the card Kellerman had given her, still in her hand. "Tell him I'll be in first thing tomorrow." She hung up and stood there for another moment. The night air had the particular quality of cities in spring, almost warm, carrying something like the promise of something, though she'd stopped putting names to things like that a long time ago. Her shift had ended 40 minutes ago. She hadn't noticed. She drove home. Made soup from a can because it was what she had. Sat at the kitchen table and looked at the coffee ring on the wood. Somewhere out there, a contact inside a criminal supply network hadn't made their meeting, didn't know if they'd been exposed, and was almost certainly trying to decide their next move. She ate her soup and didn't sleep at all. At 6:48 the next morning, her phone rang. Not Reyes, Kellerman. "Change of plans," he said. "How fast can you get to Mercy General?" Mercy General was 12 minutes across the city, Silver Creek's larger, older rival, the one that took the overflow and the trauma cases that required more than Silver Creek's infrastructure could handle. Harwick had been transferred there overnight, which she hadn't been told. 15 minutes, she said. Make it 12. She didn't ask why on the phone. She already knew it wasn't good. She made it in 11. Kellerman was in the corridor outside the cardiac care unit with Yates and a man she hadn't seen before, older, in a suit that had been expensive a decade ago, with the specific bearing of someone who had spent a career being the most important person in most rooms and was recalibrating to a room where he wasn't. He introduced himself as Harwick's attorney, name of Linden, and he was not happy. "My client agreed to speak with investigators," Linden said. "He did not agree to—" "Your client called us," Kellerman said. He wasn't raising his voice. He didn't need to. He called this number at 5:15 this morning from the nursing station phone. He held up a printed call log. "So whatever posture you're preparing, counsel, you can stand down." Linden pressed his mouth together. He stepped aside. Harwick's room was standard cardiac care, monitors, IV lines, the particular antiseptic smell of a unit that moved fast and cleaned faster. He looked worse than he had on the ER floor, which was the logic of sedation wearing off and a body catching up to what had nearly happened to it. His color was closer to human now, but not quite there. His eyes were alert in the way of people who have been frightened into paying attention. He looked at Olivia and said, "You're the one who brought me back." "The AED did most of it," she said. He almost smiled. "That's not what the nurses told me." She pulled a chair to the bedside. Kellerman stood near the door. Yates had her tablet. "Mr. Harwick," Kellerman said, "you said you had documentation." "I have more than documentation." He reached for a paper cup of water, drank, set it back with a hand that wasn't quite steady. "The person I was supposed to meet at Silver Creek, her name is Petra Souza. She's been an internal compliance officer at Dalton Y for 3 years. She came to me 8 months ago because she'd found billing records that didn't align with actual shipments, medications listed as delivered that weren't delivered, equipment invoiced at triple the contracted rate. and a secondary set of accounts, not on any official ledger, where the difference was going. "Where's Sousa now?" Yates said. "I don't know." He said it flatly, and the flatness was the thing that made it land. "She was supposed to meet me in the Silver Creek lobby at 4:15. I got there 20 minutes early because I was nervous, and then—" He gestured vaguely at his own chest. "I don't remember anything after the doors." Olivia did the math in her head. She'd started CPR at 4:21, which meant Sousa had been somewhere in or near that hospital at exactly the moment the lobby became a medical emergency. She would have seen the response, she said. Everyone looked at her. If she was already inside or watching the entrance, she would have seen the crash response. She would have known Harwick went down, and she would have had to decide in real time whether to stay or run. She looked at Kellerman. "Have you checked Silver Creek's lobby security footage from yesterday?" "It's part of the pull," Yates said. "We haven't processed the full—" "Prioritize 4 to 4:30, Olivia said. "Specifically anyone who came through the main entrance and reverse direction after the response started." Yates was already typing. Harwick was watching her with an expression she recognized, the particular look of someone recalibrating what they'd walked into. "Who are you exactly?" he said. "Travel nurse," she said. He looked at Kellerman. Kellerman said nothing. The footage took 40 minutes to process. Olivia waited in the corridor outside Harwick's room with bad coffee from a vending machine and the particular alertness of someone running on no sleep and high stakes. Lyndon, the attorney, had retreated to a corner with his phone. Kellerman was on a call at the far end of the hall. Yates came to her at 8:23. She turned her tablet around. The footage was time-stamped 4:19 p.m. The Silver Creek main lobby. A woman, late 30s, dark jacket, a messenger bag over one shoulder, coming through the automatic doors. She'd made it 8 or 9 steps inside before the response started around Harwick, the crash cart, the staff converging, Olivia on the floor. The woman had stopped. Stood there for 4 seconds. Olivia could see her standing and thought 4 seconds is a long time when you're deciding something, and then reversed, walked back through the doors, and was gone from frame. "Petra Sousa," Olivia said. "We're running the image now," Yates said. "If she's in any federal database from her contractor clearance, we'll have a match in under an hour." She lowered the tablet. The bag. She was carrying the documentation. She walked out with it. Yes. Olivia thought about that. Sousa had come to make the handoff, had seen the chaos, had left with the documents still in her possession, which meant one of 2 things. She'd run because she was frightened, or she'd run because someone else had told her to. "Does Dalton Y know about her?" Olivia said. "We don't know. If they don't know, she's scared but probably safe. If they do—" She didn't finish it. Yates's expression said she'd already run the same logic. Kellerman appeared from the end of the corridor. Something in his posture had shifted. "We have a problem," he said. He kept his voice low. "Dalton Y's legal team filed an emergency motion in federal court 40 minutes ago. They're claiming the evidence pull from Silver Creek was obtained through procedural irregularities. They want a temporary stay on the record seizure." Olivia looked at him. "They're trying to pause the investigation. They're trying to buy time," he said. "Long enough for—" He stopped. His phone buzzed. He looked at it once, and something moved behind his eyes that was not quite alarm but was adjacent to it. "Long enough for someone to reach Sousa before we do." The corridor felt colder than it had 30 seconds ago, which was not a physical thing. "They know about her," Olivia said. "One of the Dalton Y executives who was interviewed yesterday." He stopped again, jaw tight. He had a second phone. "We found it this morning. Calls made after our interview. We're tracing the numbers now, but one of them pinged a tower near Sousa's last known address." The timeline assembled itself in her head with the mechanical precision of something she'd done many times before in different rooms with different stakes. Harwick's collapse had been visible. The federal response had been visible. Whoever inside Dalton Y was managing this had connected those dots overnight and was now moving. "Where does Sousa live?" she said. "We're not—" Kellerman. She kept her voice level. "Where does she live?" He looked at her for a moment. "East Side. Apartment complex near the university. We have a unit en route, but traffic. How long? 14 minutes? Maybe less? She was already doing the internal calculation. Does she have a car? Registered to her address, yes. If she's there and she runs, you'll lose her. If she's already gone, she stopped. If someone from Dalton Y got to her before you did, you need to know that before your unit walks into it. Yates and Kellerman exchanged something that wasn't words. I'm a nurse, Olivia said. If your people arrive and find someone who needs medical attention, that's not a reason for you to... It's exactly the reason. She met his eyes. I'm also the only person in this building who Sousa might actually open a door for. She saw me. She doesn't know who I am, but she saw what I did in that lobby. If she's there and she's scared, a federal badge is going to make her run. A face she recognizes from a crash response might not. Kellerman was quiet for 3 full seconds. That was long for him. You do not enter any space before my team clears it, he said. Agreed. You stay in the vehicle until I give you a signal. Agreed. And you do not... He stopped. He looked like a man making a decision he wasn't entirely comfortable with, which she respected more than if he'd agreed easily. You do not touch anything. You do not speak to anyone official on scene, and the moment my team has the situation contained, you step back. Agreed, she said again. He turned to Yates. Get her in the second vehicle. The drive to the east side took 9 minutes at speed, and Olivia spent most of it looking out the window at a city going about its morning in complete ignorance of what was converging inside it. She'd always found that strange. Not troubling, just strange. The way the urgent and the ordinary ran parallel without acknowledgement. A man in a bakery filling a display case. A school crossing guard with a neon vest. The city just continuing, indifferent. The apartment complex was a 3-story brick building with a parking lot that held maybe 40 cars. Olivia counted the lot as they pulled in. One car was still warm. She could see it from the condensation pattern on the rear window, which meant someone had driven it recently. She noted the plate from habit. Kellerman's unit had arrived 90 seconds before them. She could see his people at the building entrance and one at the far end of the parking lot blocking the exit. He got out of the vehicle and didn't look back at her, which she took as stay. She stayed. She watched the building entrance. 3rd floor window on the left, she thought. End unit. That was where she'd go, if she were Sousa. Corner unit, 2 directions to look out from, more time to see what was coming. She was probably wrong, but she filed it. 4 minutes passed, then Kellerman appeared at the building entrance and looked at the vehicle. He held up 2 fingers, then pointed left. She got out. The stairwell smelled like floor cleaner and old carpet. She followed Kellerman up to the 3rd floor and down a corridor to the second-to-last door on the left. Not the corner, she'd been wrong, though not by much, where one of his people was standing and the door was open. Sousa was inside, sitting on the floor against the couch, not the couch itself, which was another thing Olivia registered without fully articulating. That's where people sit when they've stopped trusting normal furniture, when they want their back against something solid and low. She was mid-30s, dark jacket that was the one from the footage, the messenger bag on the floor between her feet. She was not injured. She was also not okay. She looked up when Olivia came through the door and something in her face changed. Not relief exactly, more like the complicated recognition of someone who was expecting one specific bad thing and got something unexpected instead. You're from the hospital, Sousa said. Yes, Olivia said. She didn't crouch down, didn't move into the room. She stood in the doorway and let Sousa have the space. He's alive. Stable. He's at Mercy General and he's been talking to investigators since early this morning. Sousa looked at the bag between her feet. He told them about me. He told them what he knew, which wasn't a lot. Your name, what you'd found, that you were supposed to meet him. Olivia paused. He didn't know you walked out. I panicked. She said it without defense. It was just a statement. I saw him on the floor, and I panicked and I left. You came back here with the documents. I didn't know what else to do. Her voice had an edge of something that wasn't quite anger, more like the exhaustion of someone who has been holding something heavy for a long time and is still holding it and doesn't know how to put it down. I've had those records for 2 months. 2 months of, I have a daughter. She's 7. I've been... She stopped. She pressed her hand to the bag. I didn't know if he was dead. I didn't know if they knew I was there. I came home and I sat on the floor and I waited to find out if someone was going to come through the door. Olivia looked at her. The bag. The position against the couch. The 2 months and the 7-year-old in the waiting. Nobody came through your door last night, she said. But they know who you are. That's why we're here. Sousa's hand tightened on the bag. You came back, Olivia said. You still have them. That means you didn't run and you didn't destroy them. She kept her voice even. Not warm, not clinical, just a fact she was naming. The only thing left is whether you hand them to the people in this room or we go through a longer process to get there. Sousa looked at the bag for a moment. Then she looked up at Kellerman in the doorway. 2 months, she said. Will anyone... Is there protection for... Yes, Kellerman said. That process starts today. She picked up the bag. She held it out. Yates stepped forward and took it. She set it on the kitchen counter and opened the main compartment. Inside were 2 manila folders, a USB drive, and a second drive in a sealed evidence bag that someone, Sousa probably, had labeled in neat handwriting, Dalton Y. Secondary Accounts. Backup copy. Do not open without counsel present. Yates looked at Kellerman. Kellerman looked at the drives. Then his phone rang. He stepped away to answer it, and the brief conversation was too quiet for Olivia to catch from the doorway. When he came back, his face had settled into the particular stillness of someone who has just received information that changes the scale of what they're doing. We need to move, he said. Now. Yates was already sealing the bag. Sousa was being helped to her feet by one of Kellerman's people. Olivia stepped back into the corridor. What happened? She said quietly to Kellerman as he passed. He stopped, just for a second. The federal court motion Dalton Y. filed this morning, the emergency stay on the record seizure. What about it? It was granted. Temporary hold 48 hours. We can't touch anything additional from Silver Creek until the hearing. He looked at her. Everything we have right now in this apartment is our window. She understood. The documents in the bag, 4 years of shadow accounts, diverted supplies, falsified billing, had just become the most important material in the investigation. Not because it was the only evidence, because for the next 48 hours, it might be the only evidence they could legally touch. The backup copy, she said. Yes. Sousa said backup, which means there's an original somewhere. Kellerman said nothing. Where's the original? She said. He looked at her steadily. That, he said, is what the next 48 hours are about. Her phone buzzed. She looked down. A text from Morrow, the first-year resident, the one who'd handed his notes to Yates the night before. She hadn't expected to hear from him. They locked down Silver Creek's records room this morning. Finch's attorney got a clerk in there before the federal agent arrived. I saw them carrying boxes out. I took photos. I don't know if this matters, but I thought you should know. She showed the screen to Kellerman. His jaw tightened. He turned and said something to Yates in a voice that was very controlled and very fast. Olivia looked at Morrow's text again. Boxes out. Before the federal agent arrived. Someone had known the stay was coming, not after the filing, not after the grant, but before either, and had moved physical records out of Silver Creek in the window between Dalton Y's attorneys filing and the court acting, which meant someone inside the courthouse had told them. The 48-hour window had a leak in it, and they were all standing in a third-floor apartment in Redwood Falls, holding a backup copy of records whose original had just walked out of a locked room in boxes. Kellerman made 3 calls on the way down the stairwell. Olivia caught fragments, courthouse contact, records room, chain of custody, and the particular compression of someone communicating urgency to people who needed to move before the urgency became irreversible. By the time they reached the parking lot, 2 additional vehicles had been dispatched to Silver Creek, and a federal magistrate who was not the one who'd granted the stay was being woken up somewhere across the city. Sousa was placed in a separate vehicle with one of Kellerman's people and driven to a location that Olivia wasn't told. That was correct procedure, and she didn't ask. She got back into the second vehicle and watched Morrow's text while Kellerman rode in front and made more calls. The boxes from Silver Creek's records room were the immediate problem. Not the only problem, but the one with the clock on it. Physical records moved outside the hospital's control could be destroyed, altered, or simply disappeared into a chain of custody so muddied that a competent attorney could spend years making a jury doubt it. Whoever had known the stay was coming had used a 40-minute window. That kind of precision didn't happen without someone on the inside of the federal process feeding information in real time. She thought about who, in the last 24 hours, had known both the substance of the Dalton Y investigation and the timing of the emergency motion. The list wasn't long. It was also, she recognized, not her problem to solve. She had the instinct to pull at it anyway, which she managed by looking out the window and making herself count things: intersections, traffic signals, the number of delivery trucks on the route back toward Silver Creek. Kellerman turned around from the front seat. "Morrow," he said. "The resident. Where is he right now?" He texted from his phone. He'd be at the hospital. "I need him to send those photos through a secure channel, not his personal device." He looked at Yates. "Can you reach him?" "Give me his number," Yates said. Olivia recited it from memory. Yates dialed. Silver Creek looked different in the morning light with federal presence visible at the entrance. Not dramatic, no perimeter tape, but the vehicles and the personnel created a shift in the atmosphere that the staff arriving for day shift were clearly feeling. She could see it in the way people slowed as they approached the entrance, the brief pause of recalibration before they went inside. Kellerman went in ahead. Olivia waited, again, which she was becoming accustomed to in the specific way of someone who understood that waiting was also a form of work. Yates came back with Morrow's photos on the secure channel at 9:47. She showed them to Olivia on the tablet. Clear images. Someone had carried 6 banker's boxes through the records room door. The last image caught the edge of a face. Male, mid-40s, unremarkable except for the lanyard. Not a hospital lanyard. Different color, different format. "Outside counsel," Olivia said. "Finch's attorney had authorization to access the records room as part of the grievance review process," Yates said. She said it with the flat precision of someone describing how a bad thing was technically legal. "The authorization predated the federal pull by 6 hours. They set it up before you arrived yesterday." Anticipating exactly this, Yates closed the image, which means they knew the investigation was coming before we walked through the door. That landed differently than Olivia expected. Not the content of it, she'd suspected something like it, but the confirmation, the weight of it becoming definite. She thought about the previous weeks, the schedule change, the complaint form, the careful architecture of someone managing her out. Had any of that been reactive to the federal investigation rather than just internal hospital politics? Had Finch known they were being watched and identified her, somehow, as the risk? "How long have you been watching Silver Creek?" she said. Yates looked at her. It was a beat longer than the question warranted. 16 months, she said finally. Olivia absorbed that. 16 months. The complaint form, the false insubordination filing, the schedule shift to overnight low acuity, those had come in weeks 5 and 6. If the investigation had been running for 16 months, and Finch had a source inside the federal process. "He knew I was connected to the investigation," she said. "We don't know that. He escalated against me the day after your team walked in. That's not coincidence." She looked at Yates. "If he had a source, that source would have told him my documentation was part of your evidentiary base. Removing me from the hospital removed my access. That's why the complaint went to the staffing agency same night." Yates didn't confirm it. She also didn't deny it, which was its own answer. Chapets. The records room at Silver Creek was on the 2nd floor, administrative wing, behind a door that required a keycard Olivia didn't have. Kellerman had it within the hour. She wasn't invited in, which was also correct procedure, and she spent the time at the nursing station on the 1st floor doing something nobody had specifically authorized her to do, but nobody had told her to stop. She was working. Morrow found her there at 10:30. He looked like he'd slept in his car, which she thought was probably accurate. He was also carrying his personal notebook, actual paper, which she respected, and he set it on the counter between them. "How much trouble am I in, bud?" he said. "For documenting supply shortages in your private notes? For photographing boxes being removed from a federal crime scene? It wasn't a crime scene yet when you took the photos, she said, and you sent them through proper channels immediately. She looked at him. You're fine, Elias. He let out a breath. It had some altitude to it. The septic patient from yesterday, he said. Mr. Okafor. He's stable. I wanted you to know. Good. She pulled up the chart. His lactate. Down to 1.8 from 4.1. Lines holding. Good. She made a note. Then, because she was tired and he was standing there and some things just needed to be said in plain language. The supply documentation you kept, your private notes. Did you include dates? Dates, shift times, item numbers, the names of the inventory staff who signed off. I wasn't sure what I was documenting. It felt wrong to let it go unrecorded. You were right, she said. That's all it takes. Noticing something wrong and writing it down. She closed the chart. Don't let anyone tell you that's above your pay grade. He stood there for a moment. He was going to say something and then he didn't, which she thought was probably the more mature choice. He went back to work. The federal magistrate, not the one who'd granted the stay, issued an emergency counter order at 11:15. It didn't reverse the stay on the record seizure. What it did was more targeted. It authorized an immediate forensic hold on any materials removed from Silver Creek in the previous 24 hours that were in the possession of Finch's legal team. The distinction mattered. The original stay had frozen the investigation's ability to pull additional records from the hospital. The counter order froze Finch's attorneys from doing anything with the boxes they'd already taken out. Kellerman explained this to her in the hallway outside the records room with the particular efficiency of someone who has learned to brief people quickly. They can't destroy them, he said. They can't review them. They can't move them. Everything is in forensic hold until the hearing. And the hearing is when? 46 hours. He paused. Unless we can demonstrate that the original stay was obtained through improper means, specifically through information that was improperly disclosed from within the federal process. The courthouse leak. How close are you? Close enough that I made a phone call at 9 this morning that I'm not going to describe to you. He looked at her steadily, but not close enough yet. She understood. They had the backup drives from Sousa. They had her 61 entries. They had Morrow's notebook and the lobby footage and Harwick's testimony. They had 16 months of external surveillance. But the original physical records, the paper trail that made financial irregularities into prosecutable fraud, were in boxes in a forensic hold that a judge who'd been fed misinformation had temporarily locked them out of. And the 46-hour window was ticking. What do you need? She said. Honestly? He crossed his arms. I need Rourke, the pharmacist. She hadn't heard his name since part 1 of all this, which felt like a different calendar. You haven't found him? He didn't go home last night. His car is at his address, but his phone went dark at 11 p.m. A pause. He's either running or someone reached him first. She thought about Rourke. 11 years at Silver Creek. The kind of longevity that built either deep loyalty or deep compromise, often both simultaneously. She'd watched him correct a controlled substance count without filing an incident report. He'd done it with the efficiency of someone who had done it before. Not panicked, not furtive, just quietly competent in a wrong thing. That kind of competence usually meant he had someone above him who had built the system and someone below him who didn't know the system existed. He's not running, she said. Kellerman looked at her. He's been doing this for years without an exit plan. People like that don't run. They go to the person who told them this would never happen and wait to be told what to do next. She paused. Find who Rourke answers to directly, and you'll find Rourke. Kellerman was quiet for a moment. Then he turned and walked away, phone already at his ear. At 12:40, Garrett Finch's attorney submitted a motion for his client's immediate release from federal custody, arguing insufficient grounds for continued detention. The motion was denied in 40 minutes. Olivia learned about this from Yates, who told her with the careful neutrality of someone managing information flow, and she noted that the denial had been faster than the original stay had been granted. That asymmetry meant something. At 1:15, Priya found her, not in an official capacity. She wasn't looking for Olivia specifically. She'd been pulled in for a witness interview and was waiting for it in the East Corridor, and Olivia happened to come through on the way to the vending machine, which she'd decided was a valid destination. They stood 3 feet apart in the corridor, and Priya said, "You knew this whole time." "I knew something was wrong," Olivia said. "Not all of what." Priya looked at the floor. She had the face of someone conducting an internal audit. "The laundry vendor," she said. "The comment I made. You heard that." "Yes." "I said it wasn't our problem." "I know." "I said that because I actually believed it, because I'd been here long enough to learn that believing it was easier." She looked up. "That was a choice. I made it every time." Olivia looked at her, not unkindly. "You're talking to investigators today?" "Yes." "Tell them everything, including the laundry vendor and every other thing you noticed and decided wasn't your problem." She kept her voice even. "That's what makes it right." Priya nodded slowly. She looked like she was somewhere between relieved and miserable, which was probably the accurate place to be. "The patients who were billed for things they didn't receive, the investigators are working on that." "I sent some of them home," Priya said. "People who were undertreated because we didn't have the right supplies. I sent them home and told them it was fine, and it wasn't. I didn't know it wasn't, but—" "Priya," Olivia said it quietly. "Go talk to them." She went. The thing that broke the courthouse leak open was not brilliant investigative work. It was a phone record. Kellerman told her at 3:30, with an economy that she was beginning to recognize as his natural register. One of Dalton Y's executives, the one who'd made calls on the second phone after the interview, had contacted a paralegal who worked in the chambers of the federal judge, who'd granted the stay. The paralegal had passed the substance of Dalton Y's motion arguments to someone who had then passed them to the judge's clerk, 22 minutes before the motion was officially filed. The motion had been pre-reviewed, pre-considered, and effectively pre-approved before it formally existed. It was not subtle. It was the kind of corruption that relied on speed and the assumption that nobody would look closely enough or fast enough. It had almost worked. "The stay is being vacated," Kellerman said. "We'll have full access to the seized materials within the hour." She let that register. "And the boxes Finch's attorneys took?" "Already in federal custody. The forensic hold converted to a full seizure." He paused. Rourke turned up. "Where?" "Motel off the interstate. He'd checked in under his wife's maiden name." A beat. "He called us. Apparently someone reached out to him this morning, not investigators. Someone from Dalton Y trying to find out what he'd told us. Which was nothing, because you hadn't found him yet." "Correct. But the call scared him." Kellerman's voice stayed flat. "Rourke's been diverting controlled substances for 3 years. He wasn't skimming, he was filling orders. Specific items, specific amounts, routed out of Silver Creek's inventory and delivered to an address in the warehouse district." He paused. "The address is registered to a shell company. The shell company is a subsidiary of Dalton Y. The medication shortages. Not just billing fraud, not just diverted supplies. They'd been running a parallel gray market operation out of a federally contracted hospital, pulling medications from patient inventory and selling them through a distribution network that used the hospital's own procurement infrastructure as cover. The weight of it was significant. She'd known something was wrong. She'd had 61 entries. But 61 entries and the actual architecture of what had been running inside this building were different orders of magnitude. "How many patients?" she said. "Conservative estimate, over 3 years, roughly 300 instances of care degraded by supply unavailability, directly attributable to the diversion." He said it the way someone says a number when they've already processed it and are now past the processing. Not all of them resulted in adverse outcomes, but enough did. She was quiet for a moment. "Raymond," she said, "the STEMI patient from week 5. His name was in your notes. He almost died in a hallway because the right lead for the monitor wasn't available, because Briggs didn't take me seriously, but also because the supply room was running short." She stopped. "Was that connected?" "The specific item. We're still tracing the batch. Probably." "Probably." She put that somewhere and left it there. At 4 p.m., federal agents arrived at the warehouse district address with a search warrant. Kellerman wasn't there. He was coordinating the records room work. But Yates kept Olivia updated in the intervals between her own tasks, which had the quality of someone who had decided Olivia had earned the information and was distributing it accordingly. The warehouse was real. The inventory was real. 63 distinct medication types, some controlled, some not, with distribution records going back 26 months. The operation had been running longer than 3 years, which meant Rourke's 3-year estimate was his own participation, not the program's age. At 4:45, 2 more arrests. Not at Silver Creek. At Dalton Wise Regional Office 11 miles east of the city. The COO and the head of procurement, they were walked out in front of their staff, which Yates mentioned without editorial comment, and which Olivia thought was its own form of justice, the public visibility of it, the fact that everyone who had ever worked there would watch and understand that the institution had not been what it presented itself to be. At 5:20, Dr. Harmon Briggs surrendered his hospital credentials voluntarily. He was not arrested. He was interviewed, which was worse in some ways. Arrest had a defined shape, a process. Interview just meant sitting in a room answering questions about your choices while people wrote everything down, and you understood that what you said was now part of a record that existed independently of you. She heard about it from Morrow, who heard it from someone at the charge desk. She didn't go looking for more detail. At 6:10, she was asked to come back to the consultation room. Not by Kellerman this time, by Yates, which had a different quality. Yates had a physical folder on the table, old habit maybe, or deliberate choice, paper in a room where everything had been digital, felt formal in a different way. She opened it and turned it toward Olivia. It was a personnel file, military, her own, not the full file. She could see from the pagination that this was a summary extract, selectively compiled, but the relevant sections were there, her service record, her assignments, the medical specialization that sat in the middle of her career like a pivot point before she'd left and decided not to explain herself to anyone who hadn't been there. "How long did you know?" Olivia said. "Before we walked in yesterday, yes." Yates said it without apology. "Your background was part of why we believed your documentation was credible. Someone with your training knows what a clean count looks like, knows the difference between a system error and an architectural choice. You could have told me you were already watching." "We couldn't. Any contact would have—" "I know why you couldn't." She looked at the file, her own name in the header, her own service history rendered into summary form. "I'm not angry about it." Yates closed the folder. "You should know that your documentation is being formally entered into the evidentiary record as a primary source. Not supplementary, primary." She understood the distinction. "There will be a formal process," Yates said. "Testimony, probably. Deposition before that. It will take time and it will not be comfortable." She paused. "But what you built in 5.5 weeks, without resources and without authority, and while they were actively trying to remove you," she stopped. "It's significant." Olivia looked at the closed folder. She thought about day 9, the medication count, the correction that wasn't a correction, the decision to open the Notes app instead of closing her eyes. "I was just writing things down," she said. "No," Yates said. "You were doing something specific on purpose and you knew it. You don't have to minimize it." She sat with that for a moment. Outside the consultation room window, she could see the ER still running, the steady, impersonal churn of sick people and understaffed floors, and the particular heroism of people who showed up anyway. That hadn't changed. The investigation hadn't made the ER better yet. It would, eventually, under new management, with supply chains that weren't being picked apart from the inside. But tonight, it was still the same hard work it had always been. "What happens to the hospital?" she said. "Federal receivership confirmed this afternoon. Interim administration is being assembled. The board met 3 hours ago and voted to cooperate fully, which," Yates paused, "is the kind of decision boards make when they've been shown how much they didn't know, and are afraid of what they did know becoming the next question." Finch was transferred to federal holding at 7:15. She didn't see it. She heard about it the way she'd heard about most of the day, in fragments, from people who'd seen pieces of it, assembled into a sequence that was probably close to accurate. What she did see was this. At 7:40, 2 federal agents walked through the ER with a printed document and handed it to the charge desk. It was a notification of personnel action, effective immediately. Garrett Finch's administrative authority was suspended pending criminal proceedings. The hospital's interim administrator would be a federal appointee. Name to be communicated in the morning. Tamara read the document. She passed it to the next person. It went around the charge desk in silence. Then Marcus said, "Huh," and it was somehow the most appropriate response. At 8 o'clock, Denise found Olivia near the medication room and said, "I've been with investigators for 5 hours." "I know." I told them everything, even the things that made me look bad. "Good," Olivia said. "The controlled substance corrections. I knew they weren't system errors. I was told they were system errors, and I chose to believe it because—" She stopped. "I don't have a good reason. I have explanations that feel like reasons." "Did you tell them that?" "Yes." Olivia looked at her. Denise was 60 years minus a hard year or two, the kind of person the institution had shaped and who had led it, which wasn't the same as being evil, but also wasn't without consequence. "What happens to you?" Olivia said. "I don't know yet." She said it plainly. "My attorney thinks, I don't know. Depends on how much cooperation matters." A pause. "Does it matter to you? What happens to me?" Olivia thought about that honestly. "I don't want you to be the only one who pays," she said. "That's all." Denise looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded and walked away. At 9 o'clock, Kellerman found her at the nursing station one final time. He was different than he'd been that morning. Not loose exactly. He probably didn't have a setting for loose, but less compressed. The day had gone in the right direction, and he was carrying that. "The records from the boxes," he said. "Complete set. Financial records for 4 years, procurement logs, the secondary account ledgers that match what Sousa handed us. The backup drives confirm the originals. Everything cross-references." He paused. "It's enough." She knew what enough meant in context. "Formal charges will be filed tomorrow," he said. Finch, the Dalton Y COO, the head of procurement, and 3 others whose names are in the ledgers. Rourke has entered a cooperation agreement. Another pause. "There are 2 names in those ledgers we didn't expect." She waited. "A former Silver Creek board member," he said, "and a regional director from the State Health Oversight Office." He said the second one the way you say something that requires a moment after it. "The oversight body that was supposed to be auditing this hospital's compliance has had a director on Dalton Y's secondary payroll for 2 years. The State Health Oversight Office, the body that existed specifically to catch what she'd been catching on her phone in her notes app. The architecture went deeper than the hospital, deeper than the supply company. It had included the mechanism that was supposed to stop it." She looked at the nursing station counter, the blue pens in a cup, the charge sheets, the ordinary surface of a place where sick people came for help. 12 hospitals, she said. "Yes." "The oversight director had jurisdiction over all 12. "Yes." She looked at him. "The patients in the other 11 hospitals, we're expanding the investigation as of tonight." He met her eyes. "Every supply chain, every controlled substance log, every contract that ran through Dalton Y in this region is now under review." A pause. "It is going to be a very long investigation." She thought about what that meant in human terms, not as a legal process, but as a physical reality. Patients in 12 hospitals over some period of years who had received degraded care because someone had built a system that treated medical supply as a commodity to be arbitraged. How many Raymonds? How many people who went home told it was fine when it wasn't? "The travel nurse everyone called a temp," she said, and it wasn't quite bitterness. It was something more complicated. Documented the thing that cracked open 12 hospitals. Kellerman looked at her. "That's one way to put it." She started to say something, and then her phone buzzed. She looked at it. The number was one she didn't recognize, area code she didn't immediately place, not local. She answered. "Miss Carter." The voice was female, precise, with the particular cadence of someone who chose every word and meant all of them. "My name is Brigadier General Adrian Osei. I'm calling from the Department of the Army Inspector General's office." A pause that was exactly as long as it needed to be and no longer. "I've spent the last several hours reviewing today's developments in Redwood Falls, as well as your service record and your documentation from the past 6 weeks." Olivia was very still. "I want to be direct with you," the general said. The investigation you've contributed to has implications that extend beyond Dalton Y and beyond civilian healthcare infrastructure. Several of those federal contracts that run through Dalton Y are Department of Defense contracts, medical supply for active military installations. Another pause. What you found in a regional hospital is connected to a supply chain that serves soldiers. The nursing station, the ER noise, the blue pens.
How connected? Olivia said. That, the general said, is what I'm calling to discuss with you. And somewhere in the building behind her, she heard the ER doors open, the automatic swish of them, someone arriving who needed help, the ordinary continuation of everything, as the scope of what she'd walked into expanded one more time into something she hadn't seen coming. She stepped away from the nursing station and found a corner of the corridor where the noise dropped enough to think. How many installations? She said. 7 domestic, 2 overseas. General Osei's voice was measured but carried the particular weight of someone delivering information they've already sat with for hours. Dalton Y held DoD supply contracts for medical consumables at 9 military medical facilities. The same diversion architecture we're finding in the civilian hospitals, the secondary accounts, the shell invoicing, the inventory corrections, appears to be running in parallel across those facilities. Olivia pressed her back against the corridor wall. Soldiers. Not just regional hospital patients. Soldiers in sick bays and field medical units and post-deployment care who had received degraded supplies because the same people who'd been stealing from Raymond and Priya's patients had also been stealing from them. When did you identify the DoD connection? She said. Formally, tonight. Practically, a pause. We've had anomalies in procurement audits for 11 months that we couldn't source. Dalton Y was on a list of vendors flagged for secondary review. We hadn't connected the civilian network yet. Another pause that felt deliberate. Your documentation did that. She closed her eyes for 1 second. Not drama, just the specific compression of someone absorbing a fact that has mass. What do you need from me, General? A conversation. In person? Not tonight. You've had a long day and I need to review the full evidentiary transfer with Kellerman's team before we sit down. The precision in the general's voice softened by half a degree. But soon. There are decisions being made about how the DoD component of this investigation proceeds, and you have, she stopped, chose something. Relevant context. I'll make myself available. I know you will. The general said it like she already knew something about Olivia's particular variety of available. Get some rest, Ms. Carter. The call ended. Olivia stood in the corridor with the phone against her sternum and thought about what rest meant when the thing you'd been carrying for 6 weeks had just multiplied by a factor she didn't yet have the numbers for. She went back to the nursing station. She finished the last 2 charts of her shift. She clocked out at 9:43. She drove home, and this time she slept. The weeks that followed were nothing like the clean procedural sequences that investigations looked like from the outside. They were repetitive, bureaucratic, and physically exhausting in the specific way that sitting in conference rooms answering the same questions with slight variations was exhausting. Depositions, formal witness interviews, review sessions where federal attorneys went through her 61 entries line by line and asked her to reconstruct the context of each one with a specificity that required her to be simultaneously precise and patient. She was both. It cost her something each time, but she was both. Her contract at Silver Creek had been formally suspended, not terminated, suspended, with pay, pending the investigation's conclusion. The staffing agency's Janet had called to communicate this with the particular tone of someone who had recently understood that they'd been about to process a retaliatory termination and was now professionally uncomfortable about it. Olivia thanked her and didn't make it worse. She stayed in Redwood Falls, not because anyone required it, but because it was the practical choice. The investigation was here, the attorneys were here, and the apartment was paid through the end of the month anyway. She learned the city in the slow way of someone with time and no particular agenda. Coffee shops that opened early, a park near the university where the morning light came through the trees at an angle she found useful for thinking. A diner on 4th that put too much butter on everything and whose owner, a man in his 60s named Walt, had the specific quality of someone who had seen a lot and chosen warmth anyway. She ate there 3 times a week and didn't explain herself to anyone, which was a luxury she hadn't had in years.
The arraignments began on a Tuesday, 22 days after the night in Seuss's apartment. Garrett Finch appeared in federal court in a suit that was good, but not as good as the ones he'd worn at Silver Creek, which she thought was probably intentional. Someone had advised him on optics. He entered a plea of not guilty, which was what his attorneys had been paid to arrange, and was released on a bond that was large enough to signal the seriousness of the charges and small enough to confirm that he had resources left. The charges were read into the record: federal healthcare fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. 19 counts. She wasn't in the courtroom. She watched the coverage on her phone in the diner while Walt refilled her coffee without being asked. The Dalton Y COO, a man named Bernard Pratt, whose name she'd only learned from the indictment documents, entered the same plea through separate counsel. The charges against Pratt were longer and included the DoD supply contract violations, which had been added after General Osei's team formally joined the investigation. 26 counts. The federal prosecutor's statement described the operation as one of the most systematically constructed medical supply fraud networks identified in this region in 2 decades. She read that line twice. The state health oversight director, his name was Frank Alderman, and she'd found out through the news coverage that he'd been in that position for 7 years, entered a plea of guilty to 2 counts the morning his trial was scheduled to begin, which his attorneys had apparently decided was the better arithmetic. He lost his pension. He lost his license. He was sentenced 8 weeks later to 41 months, and the coverage of it was brief and factual, which was how it should have been. The punishment was real. The theatrics didn't need to be. Rourke cooperated fully. His cooperation agreement gave him reduced exposure in exchange for testimony about the warehouse operation, the medication routing, and the names of the 2 Dalton Y employees who had managed his end of the network. He kept his freedom but surrendered his pharmacy license, which had been his career for 23 years. She didn't know what to feel about that exactly. She'd been the one who noticed his count corrections. She'd put him in her notes. But she also understood that he'd been someone inside a machine who'd told himself enough times that the machine was larger than him until he'd stopped being able to tell where the machine ended and he began. That happened to people. She knew that. It didn't excuse it, but she knew it. Briggs received a formal censure from the state medical board, a 2-year license suspension, and mandatory remediation. No criminal charges. His involvement had been negligence enabled by a corrupt system rather than participation in it, which was a distinction that mattered legally and didn't particularly satisfy her emotionally. She filed that away as one of the things that was true and also unsatisfying, of which life contained many. The hospital board's public apology came on a Thursday afternoon, 5 weeks after the arraignments. It was not the kind of apology that answered everything. It was the kind of apology that institutions issue when they've calculated that issuing it is better than not, worded carefully, with legal review evident in every sentence, expressing regret for systemic failures and oversight rather than anything that would constitute admission of specific culpability. She read it in the park near the university and recognized it for what it was. But attached to it, separately, not as part of the institutional statement, filed independently with the state nursing board and the federal investigative record, was a formal document clearing her of both complaints that had been filed against her. The first one, the patient grievance that she'd known was pre-written. The second, the insubordination allegation from the Harwick resuscitation. Both were flagged as retaliatory, documentation was provided, and the record was formally corrected. Retaliatory. The word that meant, we know what you did, we know what they did, and we are stating officially that those 2 things are on different sides of the same line. She folded the document and put it in her bag and sat in the park for another 20 minutes, watching a squirrel work through the structural challenge of a badly positioned acorn. She thought about what it would have meant to have that document 6 weeks ago, whether it would have felt different, whether the vindication would have landed harder when the injustice was fresh. She decided it wouldn't have. Vindication wasn't actually the thing she'd been after. She'd been after the patients, the correct documentation, the truth of what the supply count actually was. The vindication was a side effect of doing the thing correctly, not the point of it. That was worth knowing about herself. Well, she met with General Osei in person on a Thursday in early June, in a conference room at a federal building downtown that had the particular aesthetic of somewhere that had been decorated in 1987 and then left to consolidate. Osei was 60-something, compact, with natural gray and the bearing of someone who had decided years ago that bearing was more useful than impression. She had a folder on the table, as Yates had had a folder, and she opened it to a page that Olivia read carefully before responding to. It was a proposal. Not an order. The general was clear about that. A proposal for a 12-month detailed assignment to the Army Inspector General's office, specifically to a newly formed working group focused on DoD medical supply chain integrity. The assignment would be civilian consultant status, which preserved her nursing credentials and her current professional standing. The work would involve reviewing the procurement architecture at the 9 affected military installations, contributing to the corrective framework, and providing subject matter expertise on the civilian side documentation that had first identified the network. "This is a real position," Olivia said. "It is. Not ceremonial." "We don't do ceremonial, Ms. Carter." Osei looked at her over the folder. "The DoD supply chain review is going to take 14 months at minimum. We need people who can read an inventory log and understand what a deliberate gap looks like versus a systems error. People who won't defer to institutional authority when institutional authority is exactly what needs to be questioned." She paused. "You've already demonstrated you can do that under conditions that were not designed for your success." Olivia looked at the proposal, the pay grade, the clearance requirements, the duration. She looked at the line about subject matter expertise and thought about 61 entries in a notes app and a medication count that was wrong on a Thursday. "I have conditions," she said. Osei's expression didn't change. "I assumed you might." "I want Morrow on the reference list, the first-year resident at Silver Creek. He kept his own documentation without being asked, and he should have a formal commendation in his file." "Done." "Sousa's cooperation agreement. I want to know it's structured so she doesn't end up bearing more than her actual exposure warranted. She came forward at real personal risk." "The DOJ has already flagged her agreement for that review. We pushed for it last week." Osei's voice was even. "What else?" "The 12 hospitals, the civilian side." Olivia looked at the table. "The patients who received degraded care, the billing irregularities, the procedures invoiced but not performed. Someone has to work through that remediation specifically, not just the criminal prosecution. The patients. There's a federal victim remediation process. I know what the federal process looks like," Olivia said. "I'm saying it needs someone inside it who is tracking the patient outcomes, not just the financial restitution. Those are different things." Osei looked at her for a moment. "That's outside the scope of this assignment." "I know," Olivia said. "I'm saying it needs to happen. I'm not saying I have to be the one who does it. I'm saying someone does, and that should be a condition of how the prosecution frames the sentencing recommendations." The general was quiet. Not the quiet of someone blocking, the quiet of someone actually thinking. "I'll raise it with the federal prosecutor," she said. "I won't promise a specific outcome. I'll promise it gets raised." "That's enough," Olivia said. She signed the proposal. Marchets. The formal commendation ceremony was held on a Friday afternoon in late June in the federal building's largest conference room, which had been set up with chairs and a small podium and looked like the kind of thing organized by people who were better at investigations than at events. She'd been told it would be low-key. It was not low-key in the way that things are not low-key when more people show up than were expected. Kellerman was there, and Yates and Reyes from the DoD office, who she'd only ever spoken to on the phone and who turned out to be shorter than his voice suggested. General Osei stood near the front. Silver Creek staff had been invited. She hadn't known that. She walked into the room and saw Morrow near the back, still in scrubs because he'd come from a shift, and Priya in a blazer that looked like she'd bought it for the occasion. Marcus the tech, in the second row, with the specific expression of someone very young who is watching history and knows it. Tamara was there. In the third row, not the back. She looked at Olivia when she came in and didn't look away, which was its own kind of statement. And Raymond. She hadn't expected Raymond. He was in a seat near the aisle, and when he saw her, he raised one hand in a small wave. Not performative, just recognition. The man whose LAD occlusion she'd badgered the cardiologist over. The man who would have driven home and died in a different parking lot if Briggs had won that argument. She stopped in the aisle for a second. She was not a person who cried easily. She'd trained that out of herself in environments where it was a liability, and she'd never fully decided if that was a loss or just an adaptation. But standing in a conference room with bad carpet and fluorescent lighting, looking at a man who was alive because she'd been annoying about an EKG, she felt something in her chest that was not pride exactly, closer to the specific weight of understanding that the small choices had mattered, not the big ones, not the 61 entries or the deposition or the DOD assignment. Day 9. The medication count. The decision to open the app. She sat down. The ceremony started. The federal prosecutor, a woman named Da Silva, who had the economical manner of someone who billed by the hour and had learned to mean everything she said, read the commendation into the record. It was formal language, the kind that would appear in federal documents and personnel files, and it described Olivia's contribution to what was now officially designated as a multi-jurisdictional federal healthcare fraud investigation with DOD implications. It used words like pivotal and independent initiative and substantial evidentiary contribution, and they were technically accurate and felt nothing like what it had actually been. What it had actually been was a granola bar over a sink and a cracked passenger mirror and a notes app, and the inability to look at a wrong number and call it a system error. General Osei spoke briefly. She did not give the kind of speech that made things larger than they were. She gave the kind that named them precisely, which Olivia respected more. She said that the people who caught institutional corruption were rarely the people with the most authority. They were the people who hadn't yet been convinced that looking away was part of the job. Then she looked at Olivia directly and said, "You were underestimated at every step." That turned out to be their most significant miscalculation. The room was quiet for a moment. Not the awkward quiet of an event that isn't working, the quiet of something that has landed correctly. Afterward, in the parking lot, Morrow found her. He was still in scrubs. He had his hands in his pockets and looked like someone who had something to say and was deciding how to say it without it sounding wrong. "I've been thinking about what you told me," he said, noticing something wrong and writing it down. "That's all it takes." "That's not all it takes," she said. "That's where it starts." He nodded. "I matched into a fellowship program. Infectious disease. I found out last week." "Congratulations." "I don't know if I would have applied if—" He stopped. "I almost applied to a hospitalist program at a system hospital because it was the obvious move. More money, less friction, established structure." He paused. "I submitted the fellowship application the week after the Harwick resuscitation. I wasn't planning to. I just did it." She looked at him. He was 28, maybe 29, with the particular quality of people who are good enough to have been told they're exceptional and are still trying to figure out the difference. "You'll be fine," she said. "I know," he said. "That's actually not what I came to say." He looked at her. "I came to say thank you for not— When I said I'd documented stuff in my personal notes, you didn't tell me it was above my pay grade. You told me to hand it over. It wasn't above your pay grade." "That's the point," he said. "You treated me like someone whose instincts mattered. Nobody had done that before." He shrugged, a small, awkward movement. "So, thank you." She looked at him for a moment. "Take care of your patients, Elias," she said. "That's the whole job." He nodded. He went back inside. Priya caught her before she reached her car. "I wanted to tell you something," Priya said. She had the directness of someone who had been deciding to have this conversation for weeks and had finally stopped deciding. "The day I said it wasn't our problem, the laundry vendor." "I remember. I think I said it because you were listening." She paused. "If you hadn't been there, I would have said it to Marcus, and Marcus would have said, 'Yeah,' and we both would have gone back to work and I wouldn't have had to hear how it sounded." She looked at the parking lot. "You were there, so I heard it. And I didn't do anything with it anyway, but I heard it, and it—" She stopped. "It's been sitting with me since." Olivia waited. "I'm applying for the charge nurse position," Priya said, "under the interim administration. I don't know if I'll get it, but I'm applying." "Good," Olivia said. "If I get it, I want to set up a proper anomaly reporting system, something that doesn't root through administration. something the staff can actually use without worrying that it comes back on them. That exists, Olivia said. There are federal models. I can send you the reference documents. Priya looked at her. You'd do that. Yes. You don't have to. You're leaving. I know, Olivia said. Send me your email. Priya sent it. They stood there for a moment in the parking lot. Two people who had been in the same place at the same time and made different choices and ended up standing in the same parking lot anyway, which was the kind of thing that didn't resolve neatly and didn't need to. I'm glad you didn't leave, Priya said. Me too, Olivia said. Raymond found her near the building entrance as she was leaving. He was moving carefully, not badly, but carefully, the way people move after a cardiac event when they're still relearning what their body's terms are. I heard what they said in there, he said, about the monitor leads, the supply shortages. She looked at him. That was why Briggs almost missed it, he said. Not just because he didn't listen to you, because the equipment was already compromised. There were several factors, she said. You're not going to tell me I almost died because someone was stealing from the hospital. You're not going to pretend you didn't already figure that out, she said. He almost laughed. It came out as something shorter than a laugh, but in the same territory. I have a daughter, he said. She's 30. She's been calling me every day since this happened. Worried. He paused. I keep telling her I'm fine. Because I am fine. Because you were there. She didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything for a moment, which was the right choice. I don't know what you were before this, he said. Before you were a nurse. But whatever it was the right thing to be. She looked at him. Take your medications, she said. Follow up with cardiology. He smiled. You're going to be like this forever, aren't you? Probably, she said. He shook her hand. He went back to his car. She stood in the parking lot and let the afternoon be what it was for a few minutes. The sunlight, the ordinary noise of a city, the specific feeling of a chapter that has closed in the particular way that chapters close when they've run to their actual end rather than just stopping. She left Redwood Falls on a Sunday. 3 bags in the back of the Subaru, the cracked passenger mirror still not fixed, the world's okayest camper travel mug freshly washed and in the cup holder. She drove through the city one last time without specifically intending to, which meant she went past Silver Creek. It looked the same from the outside, which was both true and not true. The signage was the same. The parking lot had the same number of cars. The automatic doors opened and closed with the same pneumatic swish for the same rotating procession of sick people who needed help and staff who showed up to provide it. Underneath that surface, new interim administrator, appointed 3 weeks ago, a woman named Paula Rice, who had cleaned up 2 other hospital systems in crisis, and reportedly had the temperament of someone who understood that bureaucracy and accountability were not the same thing. New procurement system, federally mandated. New supply chain auditing process, with a civilian oversight component that hadn't existed under Finch. The anomaly reporting structure Priya had asked about was already in draft form. Olivia knew because Priya had sent her 3 emails about it, and she'd sent back the reference documents plus some notes of her own. The ER was still the ER. Morrow wasn't there anymore. His fellowship had started across the city. But someone else was, doing the same hard work in the same strained conditions, and now the conditions were incrementally less corrupt. And that mattered even if it didn't fix everything, even if it couldn't give back the harm that had already happened. She didn't stop. She drove past and kept going. Baz. The DoD assignment started on a Monday in August in a building in Washington that had better carpet than the Redwood Falls federal office, but worse coffee. Her office was small and had one window that looked at another building's wall. She put the world's okayest camper mug on the desk and decided it was fine. The working group had 7 members, 2 military officers, 3 civilian analysts, a contract attorney, and her. The first meeting established scope, timeline, and the particular professional shorthand of people who are going to spend a lot of time in the same room and are calibrating how much they can trust each other. She liked them mostly. The civilian analysts were sharp and appropriately skeptical. One of the officers, a major named Tran, had the specific quality of someone who had learned in the field that processes saved lives and was now transferring that knowledge into institutional architecture, which was a harder and less visible form of the same work. She was not the most senior person in the room. She was not the most junior. She was the person who had come in from the field with documentation that had cracked 12 hospitals and a DoD supply chain, and that sat in the room differently than rank or title. The first review she led was the procurement audit for a military installation in Georgia. She approached it the way she'd approached the Silver Creek supply room, not with suspicion, just with attention. With the refusal to accept that a gap between what was logged and what was present was automatically a system error. She found 3 anomalies in the first week. She documented them with dates, specific line items, names of the staff who had signed the authorizations. She presented them to Major Tran with the same plainness with which she'd filed her first incident report at Silver Creek. He looked at her documentation. He looked at her. "You were doing this in a notes app," he said. "Yes." "In a hospital where you were being actively pushed out." "Yes." He shook his head slowly, not in disbelief, in something closer to recognition. "Okay," he said. "What's next on the list?" The sentencing hearing for Garrett Finch was held on a Thursday in October. She wasn't there. She was in a review session in Washington. She followed the coverage on her phone during a break, standing in the hallway with the same bad coffee. 18 months of legal process had not been kind to Finch in the ways that 18 months of legal process are unkind to people who believed until very recently that they were insulated from consequence. He looked smaller in the courthouse photographs than he had behind the administrator's desk at Silver Creek. Not dramatically, the excellent suits were gone, but the bearing was still there, or what was left of it, which was a posture held by habit in a body that had stopped believing in it. Federal judge. Sentencing guidelines negotiated by both sides, which meant a range rather than a number. The prosecution had asked for the top of the range. Finch's attorneys had asked for the bottom, citing his cooperation, limited and late, but technically present, and his lack of prior record. The judge sentenced him to 9 years. The middle of the range weighted toward the top. She read the number. She thought about Raymond. She thought about the 300 instances of degraded care, the conservative estimate. She thought about the soldiers at the 9 military installations whose medications had been treated as inventory to be arbitraged. 9 years was not 300 patients. No number would be. That was one of the true and unsatisfying things she'd learned to carry, that the punishment and the harm it answered were never actually equivalent, that justice was not the same as repair, that doing the right thing afterward didn't undo what had happened. It just established what would happen next. It was enough to keep going. It had to be. The Dalton Y COO, Pratt, received 11 years. The head of procurement, 7. The oversight director, Alderman's 41 months held. Rourke served no prison time, surrendered his license, and was in a different city doing something Olivia didn't know and didn't look up. The shell company structures were dissolved by federal order. Dalton Y Medical Solutions ceased operations, and its DoD contracts were voided and retendered under a competitive process that now required independent supply chain auditing as a condition of eligibility. One of the remediation provisions, the one she'd raised with General Osei about patient outcome tracking, not just financial restitution, made it into the federal sentencing framework as a condition of the plea agreements. Each convicted party was required to contribute to a remediation fund specifically designated for medical care, costs incurred by patients demonstrably harmed by supply chain failures during the period of the fraud. Da Silva, the federal prosecutor, mentioned it in her statement. She used the phrase patient-centered accountability, which was not the phrase Olivia would have chosen, but conveyed the thing she'd meant. She read that part twice also. Tit. In November, she got a card in the mail at her Washington address. Physical card, which was unusual. The handwriting was neat in the way of people who had been taught to write properly and still did. I got the charge nurse position. The anomaly reporting system goes live next month. Thank you for the reference documents and the notes. Priya. She put the card on her desk next to the coffee mug. What she understood now, and would keep understanding, imperfectly, in installments, the way you understand things that don't fit inside a single moment, was that the story people wanted to tell about her was simpler than what had actually happened. The story was, she'd seen something wrong, she'd been brave, she'd prevailed. That was technically accurate the way that the gap between a documented supply count and an actual shelf count was technically accurate. True as far as it went, missing the architecture underneath. What had actually happened was that she'd been tired and skeptical and not particularly optimistic, and she'd opened a notes app on day 9 because the alternative was pretending she hadn't noticed. And pretending she hadn't noticed was something she didn't know how to do for very long without it costing her something she couldn't afford to spend. She'd been dismissed and scheduled into oblivion and had a complaint form written against her, and she'd gone home and eaten granola bars and slept badly and come back and kept writing things down. She hadn't been brave in the way the story required. She'd been stubborn in a specific, narrow direction. She'd been too trained to accept system error as an answer to a question nobody had asked. She'd been someone who'd learned in very different rooms that the people who protect institutions from accountability are rarely the most powerful people in the institution. They're the most convinced ones. The ones who've been there long enough to believe that this is just how it works, which is the most dangerous belief in any organization, because it isn't a belief about the organization at all. It's a belief about what's possible. She believed differently. She always had. It had not made her life easy. She was not sure it would, going forward. But in a small office in Washington with a coffee mug that made a joke about competence and a window that looked at a wall, she opened a new document on her federal laptop and started logging the procurement anomalies she'd found in week 2 of the Georgia Review. Dates, item numbers, authorization signatures, the gap between what was logged and what was present. The work was the same work. The setting had changed. The stakes had clarified into something larger than she'd walked into that Tuesday in March when she'd arrived in Redwood Falls with 2 bags and a cracked mirror and no particular expectation of anything. She had never thought of herself as someone who changed things. She'd thought of herself as someone who noticed them. It had turned out, in this specific instance, in this specific sequence of events, that noticing was enough. Not because it was easy or safe or rewarded in the moment, but because enough precise noticing, documented carefully and held on to through the pressure to let it go, eventually became something that a machine of denial couldn't absorb without breaking. She hadn't brought down a corrupt system. She'd been the person who kept writing things down until the system couldn't pretend the numbers were right anymore. That was all. It was also everything. Outside the window, Washington was doing its November thing. Gray sky, wind with actual intent behind it, the city continuing its particular version of continuing. She pulled up the next line item on the audit list. She started reading. The work wasn't finished. It was never going to be finished in the sense of done, completed, filed away. There would be another list after this one. Another installation. Another set of numbers that needed someone willing to believe that the gap between what was logged and what was real was not a system error until proven otherwise. She was that person. She had always been that person. She was done being apologetic about it. She kept reading. Some people are underestimated their entire lives. The institution counts on that, on the assumption that being overlooked is the same as being powerless. It isn't. The person in the room who has nothing to lose by telling the truth is always more dangerous to a corrupt system than the person with the most authority. Not because they're braver, because they haven't yet been convinced that silence is part of the job. That's worth knowing. It's worth holding on to, especially on day 9.